Greetings and good day to you. My name is Patrick O'Malley. While staying at the Bronx cottage of my good old friend Edgar Allan Poe, I came across some handwritten notes which seemed to indicate that my friend's mysterious death was actually a gruesome murder. I have written of my investigation, part of which I shall read to you now. When I returned to New York, I went back to Poe's cottage to go over what I had uncovered thus far. Dr. Moran was a strange bird, but he also had some great motive for doing in the great writer. With the passing of such a great personage at his hospital, he would be forever seen as the last man to have ever talked to Poe. He told me himself that his days at the hospital were over, and he spoke with some anger toward the administrators who had taken over the properties. He was cast into obscurity, and the only notoriety he had was his factual account of the last days of the great author, Edgar Allan Poe. He would perhaps earn much acclaim and money on the lecture tours, but he had also the means to kill Edgar. The variety of pharmaceuticals and poisons was at his disposal, and he also knew what the post-mortem examiner would be looking for. Dr. Moran is a good suspect, and I will keep him on my list. Also, there were two literary gentlemen I wanted to interview. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the famous Boston poet, was a known rival of Poe's, and he was reported to have some violent confrontations with the author, especially when Poe had been drinking. I knew that Jim Musgrave Longfellow's work was much more popular than Edgar's, and this fact alone could make their relationship a heated one. In 1845, Poe had accused Longfellow of plagiarism, and this enraged the Harvard College professor, even though he never responded publicly to Poe's accusations. However, I also knew that Longfellow was a religious man, and he detested the macabre stories Poe created. He was also heard to say, "That man should go back to hell from whence he came." However, I first wanted to visit a poet friend and fellow writer of Poe's, Mr. William Ross Wallace. He was a gentleman who recently had published a very popular poem, "What Rules the World?" In fact, he quoted his famous line from the poem when I asked him to do so. We were sitting inside a tavern on Pearl Street called Francis, and Mr. Wallace informed me that it was the regular meeting place of the Sons of Liberty before the American Revolution. "Aha, but what rules the world, Mr. Wallace?" I asked him, smiling. He smiled back and then spoke the famous lines from his poem. "The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world." And we both laughed, tipping our pints. I was still my first ginger, but Mr. Wallace was well into his third spirited ale. I then told the gentleman about my concerns. I informed him that I was aware he knew Edgar Poe when they both lived in New York, and I also told him that I was staying at Poe's old cottage on the Fordham Road in the Bronx. Finally, I read to him the note that I had discovered inside the bed of the deceased wife of Poe. I asked him if he knew anything about why Poe would want to avenge the death of Mary Cecilia Rogers, and did he know who wrote the poem that I just read to him. Forevermore, Mr. Wallace was a red-faced man with dark hair and blue eyes, and he wore the dark suit much as Poe used to wear, to affect his mindset of proper melancholy and artfulness. He was serious when he spoke to me. That was Eddie's own wife, Virginia. She wrote that one. I know because I would read it time to time whenever we were in our cups downtown. As for the avenging part, I suppose it could be Eddie might have been sore about what Mr. Anderson might have done to that little girl who worked for him. Mr. Wallace went on a length to explain the unsolved murder of Mary Rogers, the beautiful little tobacco store clerk. He seemed to know every detail of the case. He explained these interesting facts to me that afternoon inside Francis. Thank you for listening.